Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
I think we're all aware that there's been a proliferation of farmers markets and CSAs in the area. Is anyone here a member of a CSA? Anybody? Oh, two. Well, the book that we're going to hear about today, and the author is here, Julie Cushine-Rigg. The book is called A Guide to Buying Farm Fresh, but it's all about the Capital District, and I guess she'll tell you the parameters of the book, but it's basically within our area. It's a directory, it's a guide, it's a how-to, and I guess it's got all kinds of other information, but I haven't read it, so she will tell you about it. So here's Julie Cushine-Rigg, and her book is called A Guide to Buying Farm Fresh.
And I want to say great thanks to Joe for having me up here. It's a great opportunity. I've had a couple of soft debuts with the book over the winter with a couple of farming groups and events, but this is really kind of a kickoff here in the greater realm of...
Closer to the microphone.
Oh,
okay.
There we go. So here we go. We're looking into the spring and summer seasons, where it's really now the growing season. Pretty soon we're going to see more and more of our local food. But one thing I do want to say, it's available year-round. You might not think of it in the middle of winter, but we'll talk about that later. I'd like to start off by just telling you a little bit of background and how I came up to this point and getting this book done. Really, it was to quell my own sense of curiosity. It started out as a kid, grew up in East Greenbush. My mom was a nurse, Dad was an English professor. So what happened was my mom would take the opportunity on the weekends. I have two older brothers. She would take them to do the grocery shopping every weekend. And by the time I came around, I kind of knew what I was in for. We would go not only to the grocery store, that was the last stop, but what we would do is go to they weren't known as farmers markets back then, about 35 years ago, but they were farm stands, orchards, places you would just find if you knew kind of where to go. And my mom was a nurse, and she really wanted us to eat right. So one day I remember saying to her in the car, and this was a 3-hour venture, it wasn't a quick thing to run out to these places. And I said, well, why are we going to all these places? And she said, if you eat right, and you won't have to take vitamins. I want you guys to eat right. So that was her sort of short answer. But being a nurse, she really did have a handle on some of the nutritional aspects of things. So what happened was, after a few years, going to different orchards and farmers' stands and things, and not so much the grocery stores, they were sort of saved for getting the dry goods, the paper products, and all that. Fast forward, I wound up going to college for the arts and ultimately landscape architecture, and I got my master's in landscape architecture. And after I had my son, he's 12 now, and I gotta warn you, if the phone rings, it's him with an emergency, but that's the part of being a mom too. So what I did is, when he was an infant, and I think moms all go through this, you wanna know what your kids are eating. So I took it upon myself. I was working as a landscape architect, putting in a lot of hours, but I thought, I can at least puree some carrots. I can do some things. Looking at the jars of Gerber, they're fine, but if I had the time to kind of do that for him, I would. And soon found that there was a balance to all of that. And I soon found, too, that I didn't have 50 hours to put into an architect's firm to work for them. So what I wound up doing is just doing freelance after a while, some freelance writing. And I had always had writing in my schooling and the different career that I had. Was always pretty good at it, so I thought, well, let me do some personal essays. Let me do some things like that. And I looked into land use issues. I thought, well, if I'm going to do some freelance writing, maybe I can focus on what I know. Land use issues, landscape architecture, it worked out pretty good. So fast forward a little bit later, and I discovered a local paper, and that was over in East Greenbush at the time. I grew up in East Greenbush, and wound up going through the Troy Record and doing some human interest news stories like that. And every once in a while, I'd work in a farm story. And then I was lucky enough to find a publication called Country Folks. And that was mainly for farmers. And I thought, well, here's a way I can find out about our food system. And here's a way that I can write, too. Maybe eventually this would be a career. So about 5 years ago, I started on that track. I've been lucky enough to have been to a number of farms, and it's been eye-opening. It's been great being able to go to farms, to see the cattle, to see that they're out in the open, and then look back and say, okay, well, if there was something on the news about a food recall, where was that food coming from? And could it have easily come from somewhere in the Hudson Valley? So I got into going to different meetings that were happening. If there was an agency meeting, I would say, I'll cover it. You know, if they were talking about land use issues or food issues, anything with farmers' rights, laws about farming, which there are plenty of them. So I would cover those. And sooner or later I thought, you know, maybe there's a disconnect between what the farmers are putting out and the fact that maybe a lot of consumers wouldn't know where to get their goods. They were available through all these different places, but maybe if it was just out there a little bit more, they could get more of the fair dollar for their goods. So I looked into maybe putting together a proposal for such a book. And I thought, well, I've got about 6 months or a year to kind of work on this. And Paul, who's in the back there, he had picked it up and said, yeah, we're interested. So I had about 7 or 8 weeks last summer to put it together, about 3 years worth of going to farms and putting it all into one book. And it was a labor of love, and I would do it all over again. But really, it was the whole process of doing the book, going to farms, was to find out, to quench my own curiosity about our food system. And I'm not saying that, you know, everybody's got to go and get local food and, you know, just dive right into it, because you can't do that. You've got to kind of ease into it. And there's a balance. And I became aware that some, you know, my son's friends and some friends of mine, they really didn't know that there were some farms where you could get the products. They didn't know what kind of the real food was. Some kids would come over and I'd be making bread and they'd say, oh, what are you doing? Look, making bread. Is that from a mix? Is it frozen? No, it's from scratch. Have you not ever seen, you know, but it's sort of what I grew up with too. So, and I think that has a lot to do with it. And I just want to put it out that there are options for different food. I think that agriculture and the land that we use for agriculture, it's being depleted, and there are some things in supporting local farmers that we can do to help them conserve their land. And especially here in the Hudson Valley, we are so rich with agricultural land up and down the Hudson River Valley. To not take advantage of it, you know, we should. We should really take advantage of it. Has anybody ever heard of a CAFO? Okay, and that's one of the things I was curious about too. All these buzzwords were coming up, and I thought, okay, if I'm curious, maybe some other people are too. What a CAFO is a confined animal feed operation. And if you see news, media coverage on our food system, sometimes you'll see, okay, E. coli, there was an E. coli scare from this, that, or the other thing. And you'll see that they might show like a big lot or a big pasture packed with animals. And there are some sustainable ways of doing that, but more or less it seems like the ones that are having the issues are the ones that are really cramming the animals in there, maybe not doing as sustainable a practice as they could be. The local farmers are, and if you have questions about where your food is coming from, There are ways to find out. You can ask your farmers. You go to the farmers market. And there's so many farmers that are welcoming people to come onto their farm. Like Honest Weight Food Co-op, they'll do farm tours. You'll meet somewhere or caravan out to a farm, see what it's all about, and you'd be really surprised. And it's actually kind of relaxing on some of the farms to go out there and see the calves running around, to go out and see that they're out in the open. And you don't want to think about the whole cycle of life, whatever, but if they're out there, they're happy cows, And one of the things I keep hearing in the media too, and this might be, borrowing from whatever corporate things, America runs on Dunkin'. Fine, but we're going to live on local. That's one thing that if you can support local and you're able to do it in a myriad of ways, just buying local food is one of those. And, that's one of the things that I'd like to stress too. There is a balance, and not to rush out, because it can be, on the shorter term, it can seem kind of expensive. In the longer run, I think it's not any more expensive than going to the grocery store for everything. There's still some things you're going to have to get your dried pasta, some of your pasta sauces too in the grocery stores. And that's another thing. When you go to the grocery store, you might see local products that you weren't aware of. I'm in the grocery store all the time looking, I didn't realize this was made in Slingerland's. That way there is traceability too, that 100% traceability. If you've got a question about your food, you're able to kind of trace back where it came from. So has anybody also, have you heard of a CSA? No, Joe was asking me about it earlier, but didn't know how many people were familiar. Yeah, I think he asked earlier too, yeah. So you've heard of it, and one woman here was a CSA share.
Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah. And what happens with CSA, or community supported agriculture, is that it's a farm within your area, or a group of farmers who have kind of gotten together, and I think they're practically all online now. And what you can do is scroll through, see what they've got on a seasonal basis, and then you give them money ahead of the season. You'll get food all year long, but it's like a prepaid shopping ticket. And a lot of these CSAs will have pickup places at the farmers markets. So it's even more convenient. And there are so many farmers markets popping up everywhere. There are so many popular ones. Up in Saratoga, there's quite a popular one that's been around for 30 plus years. They were just voted #1 in the state, favorite farmers market, which is no easy task. You've got a lot in the state. I think locally we have about 50, give or take, in the Capital District. And there are smaller ones popping up all over. They're not required to be registered with Ag and Markets or anything. So that number probably is a little bit higher too. There is a site that you could go to. I think it's called NewYorkFarmersMarkets.com. And that's an actual directory. And these days too, you can Google, practically everything. But the CSAs are a wonderful option, and so are the food co-ops, like the Honest Weight Food Co-op. And I think that there's one in Niskayuna. There was one in Troy. So these things, they are happening. There are alternatives for the grocery stores, and like I say, there's quite a balance there. And it's just up to what kind of time you wanted to put into it, what kind of money, and how you cook too. That has an awful lot to do with it. The typical home cook, you may not know what to do with rutabagas. I certainly wouldn't unless I maybe asked a farmer. They've got wonderful tips about cooking. And I've learned quite a bit about that. The other part about this book is that I talked with area chefs, because I thought, well, I'm talking with the farmers. The other end of that not only is the consumers, but it's the chefs who are buying the farmers' products. Everything always tastes better in a good restaurant. You wonder why. Geez, I try to cook that at home, but I just can't get it, They're using a lot of the freshest ingredients they can. And although it looks like they're getting things in the big massive trucks from Cisco and that, yes they are, but there are also opportunities where they're taking and saying to Cisco, can you look into what's available local and bring it to me that way? Or they're going to the farmers themselves and saying, okay, I can order this side of beef from you. And they will think on a seasonal basis, the chefs and the restaurants that are supporting local. And more of them are. And it's really nice to talk with them. And some of the recipes are in here that they've supplied. And I've given a couple of my own, only because I was lucky enough to marry a man who was wonderful in the kitchen. It's always a plus. He wanted to go for culinary arts. And I learned a lot about the food system early on kind of from him. We've been married for about 22 years coming up, and the techniques too. And that comes down to, you know, how are you cooking and what techniques are you willing to learn? Which ones do you have? And it's just a matter of what you're wanting to put into it too. And on the side of using packages and things, it is wonderful to be able to pick up a package for hollandaise sauce. You know, if you're in a quick fix, you got company stopping by or something, it's great to be able to pull that off the shelf and or out of your pantry and use it. And I do the same. If I need something done quick like that, perfect. But more and more I have found that if I have some of the staples on hand, local eggs, I'll get them from the corner grocery store, they're local, or as local as you can get them. You've got some of those things on hand, and it's easy enough sometimes, you know, to do something like that from scratch, and you're not eating what my dad had always referred to as a chemistry set, because if you look on some of our food labels, even I remember growing up, and he'd say, can you read the label on this box or bag or whatever it is of food? Because yeah, we were getting stuff from the farmers, but we were in the 70s. They had 3 kids and neighborhood kids and cousins stopping by. They had to feed all these kids. You know. My parents, so they would have some things like, you know, the packaged cookies and stuff. And my dad'd say, that's a chemistry set. You know, look at it. What's the first ingredient? And you know, you're a kid and you're going, well, I better read this. I just want to eat the cookies. You know, and he'd say the first ingredient is usually the most prevalent in the food that you're eating. You know, I didn't even know about what he was talking about. I'm, you know, 10 years old, just want to eat the cookies. But later on, you know, after discovering and looking back about how our parents had integrated food and where they got it, how they got it, and it also revolved around their cultures too, with what they grew up with. Mom was Irish, Dad was German, and we had sauerbraten, we had Irish soda bread, but things like that that required you to have some more of the fresher ingredients. And this just sort of, you know, A, it's a product of what I grew up with. B, it's quenching my own curiosity about our food system, which is, a lot of people are saying, broken. There are things that are wrong with it. Having just been able to sit in on some conference calls with legislators, lawmakers, agency folks, and farmers, because there were plenty of calls where they were bringing them all together to find out how to solve some problems. And one of the things that I was amazed by, something called COOL legislation, country of origin labeling. And it had to do a lot with the dairy, a lot of the dairy products. And somebody, I think it was one of the Congress folks or something, saying, you know, that we have flavorings coming in from Japan that wind up in our dairy products that we're buying off of the shelves. And there's not a lot of regulation going on there. And I was astounded, and that was just one of the other points. And I thought, you know, let me dive into this just a little bit more and find out. So there are constantly laws being looked at. There are constantly things that are being done to, you know, try to change our food system. And just, I'm just saying, maybe be aware of, you know, where the food is coming from. You do have choices. Support local. We try to support local. A lot of people do on a lot of other bases. And why not our food? So at this point, I'd really like to open it up. If people have questions, anything. Yes, sir.
Well, a friend of mine, he's been working at a farmer's market in Amherst for about 20 years. His wife works the one in Northampton, and he's been there a long time. Recently, there was an article about him in the New York Times. What has happened is now supermarkets have big sections of local products and so on, and they buy in volume, and he claims he can't compete with them. So basically, he said they're hurting there because the equivalent of Price Chopper and so on is selling for less because they buy in big volume from farmers. And I wonder if that will hurt some of the farmers' markets because they can undercut it, but yes, they advertise this is locally grown and so on. So I don't know if you can have any comment on that.
Well, I guess A is read your labels. If they're advertising it as local, actually go in, look at the label, find out where it's coming from. And yes, a lot of the grocery stores are doing that, but some of them are actually carrying some of the farmers' products. But as people become more aware that they can get things directly from the farmers through farmers markets, CSAs, cooperatives, that's where the real support is going to come in for the farmers, I think. And then the grocery stores hopefully would, tend to come around later. They're already buying local produce from farmers in Schoharie County, where they're able to do a large volume of that kind of thing. Shaw Farms down in Schoharie has been providing local produce to Price Chopper and Hannaford for 25 years now, and it's a bulk of his business. So I guess it really depends on the farmer's volume, what they're doing, in the area too that they're in, and can people get to them. And that's, I think, one of the greatest things about CSAs, I think, are going to be coming up more and more popular. They're going to be in more areas. They're already in so many counties here. And it's Sarah Gordon Avery is the founder of Farmy. I think it's like farmy.com. And she operates like 3 essentially CSAs. And it's there, where the popularity of the farmers' products are coming up. And I had hoped in the not so distant future that we will be able to support our farmers like that, and then the grocery stores eventually would come around a little bit more to carry some of their products. But I would guess say, read the labels. And if you're in an area where you're in a smaller grocery store, maybe there's one on the corner, ask the manager, hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? And that gives them, it opens up a dialogue too, I think. So I hope that answers your question, but yes.
The difference between organic and local, is it a lot of the local food organic, or does it matter? Or
It depends. Organic is a practice of using none of the herbicides, pesticides that are sprayed, or if they are, they're of a plant derivative or something safe and sustainable for the environment. So yes, there can be local foods, but they're not necessarily going to be organic. But what I find with most of the farmers around here, they're responsible. They're doing things sustainable. And if you want to know how they're raising their crops, their animals, ask them. They're more than glad to help. And it takes a lot, from what I understand, it takes a fair amount to be certified organic. So in order for a farmer to say, I am organic, and I can put up a sign saying everything here is organic, I think there are a lot of steps to that, and there's some money involved, I'm not sure. But a lot of the farmers, regardless, they're doing practices that are very close to being certified organic without that piece of paper. But then there are some of the what they call conventional farming methods that do use perhaps occasionally the herbicides or something. But I think for the most part, the ones up and down the Hudson Valley that I'm aware of are doing it in a sustainable way. And to control pests maybe on a larger scale like that, you do have to implement some of that. So again, there's a balance with that too. So I hope that answers that.
Well, I was going to ask you again also about organic, that it seems like a lot of the organic is coming, it's being done by corporations now. And, and I just wonder if it's that good, really, or if you know anything about that.
Well, the thing is too, and I'm thinking that you're thinking of the ones that are out perhaps in California. You get your nice little thing of strawberries and Price Chopper, and it says organic, or something.
Yeah, or it could
something.
be canned goods.
Canned goods, right. And I don't know a heck of a lot about it, but it brings up another point, too. Of course, read your labels, but if you're buying fresh produce in the grocery store, again, how far, and there's something called food miles, how far did that pint of strawberries come to get to you? And what did it look like when it got picked? If you just think about it and maybe wait until we have them in season, at least in New Jersey or something where they're not traveling as far, and you might know that, yeah, they were raised organically or close to it. There are a number of organic, it seems, the corporate farms, and I really am not as familiar, only because I've been able to focus more on the local. But yeah, it comes down to food miles, look at your labels. If you have the chance to ask farmers, and farmers, I gotta say, even if you don't go to a farmer's market or something, if you do go to a co-op, or even you can Google farmers in your county and say, give them a call, say, hey, what farmers markets are you at? How do you raise your animals? How do you raise your crops? If they're not available because farmers are out farming, they've got somebody around that would be more than glad to talk with you. Sorry, we had a question over here.
It seems to me that you could be organic and still be from genetically modified stuff. The farmers could get their seed. I'm thinking these corporations could still get GMO seed. So you're not, if you're getting it locally, you know exactly what you're getting. But what I wanted to ask you is you emphasize, and understandably, you emphasize the Hudson River Valley farms. What area geographically does your book cover? The farms in what area?
We go from about Washington County, and I only profile maybe 5 or 6 farms in here only because of space, but I list more than that. But from about Washington County down to Columbia, Schoharie County. But my hope is too that at some point I'd be able to do a supplement to this and that's why I have on the back here, ask Julie about farms at AOL.com, and I could at least give you information about farms in your area. But we tried to, and Paul and I talked about that early on too, and I thought, 100-mile radius, and well, we cut it back to about 50.
You list everything down, like down the Hudson River, because you mentioned
yeah, there's actually one of the things that I talk about in here, I think I list them, but there's Stone Farm Barns downstate. They do a lot of education. They're sort of a living, breathing organization that if you want to know about farming, they've got on-site organic farms. They support that kind of thing. They're listed in here, and there's so many organizations, though, popping up throughout the Hudson River Valley. And I do bring that up, too, because I'm connecting with more chefs that are down in, like, the school systems. There's farm to school. There's, farm to table. All these terms are coming up, but they're real things that are happening. And one of the chefs happens to be down in the Round Out Valley growers. There's a school district down there about an hour south of here. And they're doing wonderful things. That's kind of why I say the Hudson River Valley. And too, because it is so rich with ag lands, and it's beautiful. And going to these places and having practiced in landscape architecture, it's just so sad to see that, maybe 20 years from now, a lot of that won't be available. One of the ways we can help farmers is to support them, and then they'll be able to hand down their farms. And there are a lot of young farmers coming up, too, that maybe haven't grown up with it, that are... Well, there are funds and grants available, too, for them. And if they find maybe a farm that has been abandoned and they want to rework it into something else, there's so many opportunities for them. And from calls that I've sat in on, there are a lot of younger farmers coming
I'm
up.
just going to comment that this might be interesting, especially to the local farmers here, but the Labor Department's proposed legislation, or not proposed regulations, that would have to be shot down by Congress within 30 days or something like that, where they're proposing that anyone under the age of 18 can't work. So you get a kid on the farm baling hay, a little girl going out there to feed the chickens, they want to cut that down.
Interesting that you bring that up. I just did a story on that last week. Yeah.
One last thing is they want to get rid of 4-H groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I questioned the Department of Labor, who a spokesperson from there did not want to be identified. So I had them on the phone. I ran right down the list because I'd gone to the press conference, and I said, what about all of these things that the Farm Bureau actually put the press conference together to talk about the Department of Labor's proposed, this stuff. And I went right down the list. And I said, are you saying that this is not going to happen? This, kids being able to use the hoses. She said, that's false. Kids raising animals for educational purposes. She said, false. She went right down that list. You're probably familiar with some of the things. And so I said, well, what can you put into language then? Where did the Farm Bureau get this? And what are you saying then is being restricted, and they're in this so-called waiting comment period right now, and they couldn't disclose kind of any more information. So we're in a wait and see thing with that right now, unfortunately, and you would hope that the family farms, and another thing that comes up is if they're corporate or LLC, then they wouldn't be able to have their kids work. It looks just like a little bit of a mess right now, but hopefully they'll come through and say it's too restrictive, but there are safety concerns too, so they're weighing everything.
Well, if you wanted to eat just local, and that would cut out, I just had a banana, grapefruit, oranges, and almost everything you drink, coffee,
Right.
tea, hot chocolate, and a lot of other vegetables that are here now. Now, I know you can do that in a greenhouse. I have friends who do bananas, but basically, that would be very restrictive. The book came out, someone wanted to eat only within 100 miles of where he lives, but I don't think you can do it without cutting out a lot of food that is good and healthful, but can't grow it here.
Yeah. There are a lot of friends of mine that say they'll try and do a 50-mile diet or a 100-mile diet, and they're hard-pressed too, like you say, to get everything locally. I mean, that's why I say there's a balance too. There are only so many things we can grow up here, have access to. I'm curious about the banana guy though. That's interesting. But yeah, there's a balance, and I would say just if you haven't thought about local before, local food, just looking to see what options are out there. Strike a balance. But yeah, you've got a great point, and my idea is kind of just to ease into it and see what's there. But yes, I think we had a question back here.
More a comment. You're talking about local food in the grocery.
Yes.
And that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
But you go to a farmer's market or you go to a farm, and corn is a menu. This kind of corn, that kind of corn, this kind of corn, that kind of corn.
Yeah.
Tomatoes, strawberries. Not just one kind
Right.
of a fruit or vegetable, but a whole panorama of that particular species.
Absolutely.
And then you get really picky about, well, no, I only want.
Well, I think the secret is there to learn a little bit about the varieties. Again, ask your farmer.
Well,
And
grow it in your backyard.
yes,
But that's work.
it's a lot of work, yeah. And I would encourage you too to talk with area chefs, because they're the ones too that are buying varieties from the farmers to say, okay, well, this kind of corn isn't going to work for whatever kind of a dish. It's just dialogue, but yeah, you bring up a great point. I think we had a question back here.
Well, I wanted to ask you about local versus CSAs and sustainable and conventional. Some years ago, when Ingalls Farm, which was right near here, and they had their fields out by the airport, I asked them if they used chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Now, they were local farmers, and they said they did.
Yeah, local does not mean.
I know.
Yeah, okay.
So my question is, do you have in your guide a list of the farmers who are using sustainable methods and the CSAs that are in the area? I'm assuming that you've listed the CSAs.
Yes.
And when you said you profile like 5 or so farms.
Yes.
What exactly were your method of profiling? What did you ask about? What did you see? As far as chemical fertilizers and pesticides and that sort of thing.
All the farms that I had visited and profiled in a few years have been doing sustainable practices and animal humane. That's another label to look for. They were doing sustainable practices. Because I didn't know a lot about the conventional, but I will say that Shaw Farms down in Schoharie County does a level of, and he said right up front, Dave Shaw's, you know, I do a level of conventional farming because on that level, you can't, without a lot of trouble and some other things, get into 100% organic. There are just some pests that you cannot control on his scale of farming. But the ones that I do profile in here are doing sustainable things. And one of the places, the man who wrote the foreword to this, Morgan Hartman, raises cattle in Berlin. And he is really an advocate, proponent for other farmers, and his voice is really getting heard out and among all kinds of farmers about being sustainable. I wanted to know about the more sustainable ones. It just happened to be the ones that you know, I was looking for. And like I say, for the most part, farmers around are doing sustainable things. And when a farmer says, yes, I am using pesticides, herbicides, something like that, you have to look too at the level, what level are they farming at and what level are they using those for? There are parameters and all these other things that say it's safe for human consumption within these parameters, and the best thing to do is for a list of organic farms, I'm sure there's you know, a list that you could probably Google. I don't list every single farm in here, and that wasn't my intent because there's just not the room or the time to do that. And I thought with the internet is just, it's really easy to do that. But this is a starting point.
Can you describe what you mean by sustainable? Or what
Sustainable, yep. Over a long period of time, practices in agriculture or anything else that will sustain your practices and not deplete natural resources, fossil fuels, that kind of thing, and not deplete the microorganisms and all the good things that are in the soil by putting pesticides, herbicides, loading it up with all these things that it doesn't need, and let the natural processes, because if it's one thing I've learned from farmers is that the natural processes that are out there in the soil alone are magic. You let the worms and everything else do their business, and you don't really have to rely on some of the pesticides, that kind of thing. I don't know if that really answers, but there's so many things that are Googleable now. And Cornell Cooperative Extension, another gentleman was asking before about resources for finding things. Cornell Cooperative Extension is a great one to call. Actually, if you want to get a person on the phone, call your local Cornell Cooperative Extension agency. That's what they're there for. If you're thinking about doing some farming, if you have questions about a farm, if you want to find a farm, they can help you. And you know, another thing is look on our government sites like Ag and Markets. They list out farmers markets. They list out different things. So I hope that helps. Yes.
You see grass-fed meat,
Oh,
natural meat,
oh, I should back up.
regular meat.
Grass-fed.
Can you tell us the difference?
Absolutely. Well, in a nutshell, I'll try. I was never a fan. One of the reasons I went and looked into grass-fed beef, I'd never heard of this term, and I was never a fan of beef. I hated McDonald's. Even as a kid, I didn't like the taste of it. And one of the assignments I was sent out on about 3 years ago was for Green Up Grass-Fed conference in the middle of February. And I thought, what the hell is this? You know, what are they talking about in the middle of February? And, you know, aren't cows just raised out in the Midwest somewhere? What is the deal here? I went to that conference with a whole new perspective on cattle, how they're raised, and the alternatives. For the most part, what you're going to get at McDonald's are animals that have been raised on the CAFOs that we talked about. Regulations are different. There are so many, especially grass-fed beef farmers popping up from Schoharie County, out near Schenectady, all over the place. It's becoming so popular. cows were meant, or they're raised to eat grass. And when conventional farmers in these CFAO operations transition them into eating grain and some other things and byproducts that, you know, you don't want to think about, but they're feeding them to them. And there was the E. coli thing, I think a few days ago, the scare out in California, but it was a random test. They said it wasn't going to be in the food system. It never was in the food system and all this, but it makes you wonder. So I did look into the grass-fed beef, and the cattle are out on pasture. They're allowed to get fresh air. It makes a difference. They're raised on grass and forages, and the farmers will plant different things for different seasons. And to get them, we're all used to this marbleization in our steaks. And a lot of people say, well, grass-fed beef, it doesn't have it. They're doing so many cutting-edge things with trying to get that marbling into the grass-fed beef, and it is a different taste. I'll say it's fresher. I like it a lot more because I just am not a fan of, you know, the regular beef that's out there. So grass-fed beef, it's an alternative to conventional.
So what about natural?
Natural, I think, is along the same lines, and I haven't really seen natural beef, or, you know, I just have come across the grass-fed beef versus conventional, but I would say it's probably more along the lines of the grass-fed. And there's also something called grass finishing, where they've raised the calf from grass onto a certain age, and they usually send them to slaughter at about 18 months. Well, maybe the last 6 months, they put them on kind of a grain to get that marbleization. But then that is also, they're looking into more natural things, because the farmers are doing this, that are doing it, are after the sustainable practices. They started that calf out on grass, and they're wanting to carry through to a certain degree. But they want to meet with the mass appeal, so to speak. So.
I think either way, the thing you're getting away from is like the Purdue chickens, and they feed these things steroids. I mean, if you look at the size of the chicken breast, for example, you get a Purdue chicken breast, they have these things packed so tight that they can't move, and it's a good thing because with all these steroids, they fall over. I mean,
right.
they're unnaturally large.
Yeah, they do have to slaughter them before a certain age because they'll have broken legs. I mean, it's just something to think about.
Yeah,
that
those steroids end up in our bodies.
Right. And there's another whole thing, and my husband actually, he happens to be a toxicologist scientist, so we get into these conversations all the time, and I ask him way too many questions, and that gets me on something else. I wanted to mention there's something that I picked up, a book, and I didn't get a lot into it in here because it's kind of massive, but it's called The Organic Manifesto. It's written by Marcia Rodale of Rodale Books. Throughout her family were farmers, and they experimented with farming practices and stuff. And if you want to know about organic versus conventional, what herbicides, what things are winding up in our foods, get that book. And it's in the nonfiction, like 651, 681, around there. It's out right now. Otherwise, I would have brought it up. I was going to show you the cover. It's not a big book. It's got a white cover with some, nice lettering in it. But it's really full of information. If you want to get down to the nitty-gritty, take a look. Yeah, absolutely. You'll be eating a salad for lunch. But I did want to say, too, there's another book. It came out about a year ago. It's called Fair Food. I had the chance to talk with the author, Orrin Hesterman. And they do, it's a place out of, I think it's Detroit, where they've got this Fair Food network. And he had been tied into some of the universities. He's just one of the authorities on fair food. There's Michael Pollan, too, Omnivore's Dilemma. And the farmer that he profiled in there, Joel Salatin, I actually got to meet at the Green Up Grass-Fed conference. And I did get to ask him a couple of questions. And I was able to call up the farm later. And he wasn't there, but his wife was. It's eye-opening. Joel Salatin has some books out, as well as Michael Pollan and this Orrin Hesterman. I mean, to find out more, there's just so much stuff out there. And this really, my book only touches the tip of the iceberg, really. Yes?
I have a question on price. I know right now they opened a new store here. They had eggs 88 cents a dozen. Now, I think the free range is much, much better, and that's $3 a dozen, $3.20. So it's not even like 80 and 90. It's
right.
3 times. So what if a poor person were going to go and they say, gee, I prefer free range, but the price is so much higher? Does does this then work against people who don't have a lot of money?
And that's the other thing too, and that's why I say in the long run, I don't think it's going to be, especially as we support more farmers, I don't think that that price difference is going to be so large. I think that the more we support the farmers, the prices will be able to come down because they'll be able to accommodate, they'll be able to forecast what they're doing. And Morgan, the man who wrote this, again, just a wonderful authority on these things, keeps an eye on, as all farmers do, commodities, prices. And they have an eye on what's going on in the grocery stores and what people are buying and the trends, the food trends. In the short term right now, it is a big difference. You know, if you're going to find, myself included, sometimes if there's something on sale and it's a tight week, well, guess what? You know, but I think as we support more and get the options out there to consumers to know that, you know what, there's another option. We can support the farmers, and in turn, they'll support us. It'll support the land. Prices are bound to come down. And if you see in the seasonality of it all, in midsummer, you're going to get tomatoes for a pretty good price. As the season winds down, they're still good. It's just as the season is winding down. And maybe that's the time to look into other methods for canning, freezing, all this other kind of thing. We can't do it with eggs, obviously, but unless there's some secret, I don't know. But yeah, you bring up an excellent point. And, that's why maybe you balance it out. Maybe you get the free-range eggs that cost a couple of dollars more, and maybe you get something else that doesn't cost as much where you would have spent, or you get your protein from some other way, or it's all a balancing act, I guess. So.
What did you say about Dell? What's the name of the book?
Oh, the Organic Manifesto. Yeah, it's not exactly light reading, I gotta say. You might want to have a little notepad or something, just if you're curious. Or just, read through it and get some of the points that she makes on that. If anything, it just opens your eyes to what is winding up on the CAFO places and the places you're seeing and the news coverage. And really, to be honest, that was one of the first things that I saw in the news, and I thought, well, what the heck is this? There's some food scares. And what brought it up too in my mind was, for my thesis for my master's in landscape architecture, I went to Ireland, and it was about 1995 or so, and the whole mad cow thing was coming up. And I went to farms there because I was talking about the land, and I was talking about stories too, because it's just the land of stories. And when I went onto a cattle farm, I could not wear my own boots. I had to wear the farmer's boots, farmer's jacket, so as not to either bring in any contaminants or onto the farm or bring any away. And he said, if you do anything while you're over here, make sure that the beef, again, the whole beef thing came up. It's been following me for years now. He said, eat what you know is from this country, because we will get in beef from England. And that is going to probably be, if not contaminated, there's a good chance. Look out for what you're eating. And I don't think I ate another piece of freaking beef while I was in Ireland after that. But it brought up, and I was doing the master's in landscape architecture and designing places and spaces for people and that, but I got familiar with land use issues through that and just talking with people. And farmers everywhere are willing to talk. They want to. If they themselves can't, like I say, they've got people that you may or may not be able to be there, pick up the phone. Email is a wonderful connection to farmers. A lot of them have websites. Farmers market's a great outlet. And a lot of farmers are reporting that they say, I've got regular customers, I know the whole family. And I've talked with the families, I love going to talk with the farmer. I can have something set aside. And back 35 years ago, my mom was doing that at the local farm, saying, you know what, next week I'd like to have something. What do you got coming up? And she thought seasonally. Not a lot of other people were at the moment. And I thought, oh, she's crazy. That farmer's not going to set aside something for it. Sure enough, the next week, we get up there, Mrs. Cushine, here's your pint of strawberries. Did you need two? Because I set aside two because they looked real good. And she really got the dialogue going too. And she had always said, you're going to have to get your food for your family later on when you grow up. Know who you're talking to. let them know your name, get their name, talk with them. And we would go to the area butcher over in East Greenbush. It was Arthur Marweedle. And I think he's since, long retired, but, every week, go in, what's the freshest? What do you got? And they suggest things. How do you cook it? So. But yeah, it's a balance. This is just a starting point. And I hope it sort of helps and gets the options out there, so.
If you don't mind making a comment, adding another comment, that what you just said about getting to know the people, getting to know their names and all that, that is very important. And it's not just there. I mean, I've gone to restaurants and I know people at pharmacies.
Absolutely.
Since I retired, I've got time for that. And I'll tell you, I've gotten tips, people who've given me information, come back tomorrow, we're going to have such and such. And the best thing is nowadays people just don't communicate with people. They're too busy, they're working, they got family, they're running here, they're running there, and people don't connect. If you make that connection, that's valuable. That's very valuable.
And one of the things I want to say too is don't shy away from asking the chefs. If you go out for dinner, I know that with my family, we're going to go out for dinner if we can get something that we're not going to cook at home. Ask the chef. Ask the waiter, can I say hi to the chef? Or can I get a recipe or partial recipe? I've gotten more recipes from restaurants that you can get them. You can open a dialogue, and chefs are more willing now to come out from behind the shadows. There are restaurants that have the open kitchen there that they're saying, okay, well, special, it's high end. The people can rent these tables in the kitchen and, eat as the things are being cooked or watch them. And it's always intriguing, isn't it, to look behind and go, what are they cooking? How are they doing it? And my husband always say, yeah, they'd probably let you know, but can't we just eat our meal in peace? And I say, well, I want to know. Wouldn't they, so 15 years ago, it wasn't all that popular, and I was doing it anyway. But now it's becoming more popular, and it's not met with, oh, well, they're busy, or they will, at least acknowledge that you've asked something. Again, emails, contacting restaurants. If it's not the chef, it's a manager or something. Feel free. The people are willing to open up about that, and the fact that they're using local. They really are. Yes.
Comment about the CSA, if anybody's thinking about it. I've done it for 2 different summers. If you have a small household, like there's only 2 people, find a friend or relative to share it with, and it makes it more fun because it's social. You can get together to divide up your box.
Yes,
and
trade recipes too.
Yes, trade recipes.
Absolutely.
Or whatever. And the one that I belong to, you can get a bread share, an egg share, and a fruit share, as well as your veggie box. And those are optional. So it was a lot of fun to get certain ones. The egg share they're the best eggs I've ever tasted.
Yeah, and the variety in the CSAs is remarkable. And the man behind you was asking about doing bread, so I think in another year you're probably going to be buying his bread.
I didn't know anybody was doing that.
The bread share in Denison Farm comes from the Placid Baker in Troy. He makes the breads for there. He's a wonderful baker. He goes to the farmers market too.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised how many businesses and bakeries and things are doing local with,
It's actually a lot of fun if you're interested in it.
Great, thanks for that. Appreciate that. And do you have any other questions or comments? Today we're actually doing a special price on the book, I'm told by Paul, which is a wonderful thing. $15 will get you the book, and I can hang out for a little while and sign some copies if you like. And if you wanted to get a hold of me, I have an email on the back of here. It's just simple, askjulieaboutfarms@aol.com. I have a website. I've got to gear up and get some more scheduling things on it. But aside from writing the book in agricultural, I do a fair amount of humor, and I'm a big Irma Bombeck fan. I've got some humor on here. I've got a crazy dog at home. It was just wonderful, but provides for a lot of humorous personal essays. So it's just my name, Cushine-Rigg.com. If you want to see what's happening with the book, I may be able to put on some links to different farmer CSAs, things that you guys have asked about, which is great because then it gives me an idea of what you all are looking for and what I can do on a bigger scale as opposed to answering individual emails or something. So, great.
So if you go and do some research on a 6th or a 7th or whatever farm, might that end up on your website? for those
Oh,
of us.
yeah. And I haven't been able to write for the agricultural trade publications, which I absolutely loved recently, but I will work into any chance I get farming or agriculture into, I report now for the Spotlight, and I will work in any way I can land use issues on that. So take a look. I just did one on the Saratoga Farmers Market. It's in the Saratoga Spotlight this week.
So we can get the book and actually update it from your site. So
Yeah, feel free.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, I think that I'd be able to maybe not do full profiles like to the depth that I would want, but maybe in a year or two I'd be thinking that either another region to cover or more in-depth hours. There's always the option to do that. So, yeah, I haven't gotten into the number of farms that I would like to. I'd like to be able to get out onto every farm, and I personally find it relaxing and welcome the fact that farmers open up their places for people to do a tour, see what they're doing. So, right. Well, thank you.